Okay. Hey, welcome back. I don't have to fix my camera here. Yeah. So welcome back. As I said, today I wanted to talk a little bit about something that has been known for really forever, but has been discounted over the last 100 years. This idea of the ether, or it's spelled Aether usually, and but it's not just that. I mean, there's so much more that goes into this. So I'm going to just try to unpack a little bit of it. I don't know how far I'll get, and we could actually you could write books about this, but the idea of the Aether, or the anima mundi, the soul of the world, or it's also been called the quintessence, the fifth essence. So we have the four essences of earth, air, fire, and water. But the quintessence is the one that's beyond that. And it's, according to, I think it's Robert Flood, the Rosicrucian philosopher, it's more subtle than fire and air. So it's kind of, we could think of it as the element or essence that's kind of at the threshold of spirit and matter. Now, the thing that's happened is most of our science, since the scientific revolution, and certainly since ether got kicked to the curb 100 years ago, has discounted even the existence of the spirit. But it's a bad idea. Now, this idea, you can find this in Plato and the Timaeus. You can find it in Aristotle. I think Aristotle, in both his book On the Heavens and I think Meteorology, he talks about the ether. We hear it in the Middle Ages. It's just assumed through the Middle Ages and the Renaissance that this is part of things. And part of what happened with the scientific revolution in the 17th century is they started to discount this, right? So this is kind of a outgrowth. Oops, I just dropped a guitar pick. Outgrowth from nominalism, or Occam's razor, right? That entities do not need to be multiplied, and eventually it was completely discounted. But here's the thing: it's kind of interesting. It didn't go entirely away. It just kind of took on other forms. Now, one way we can think about this, and I don't want to make this too strong of a connection, but I think it certainly parallels this. One thing we never hear about in contemporary science is the Greek concept of zoe, which means life. But Greek is a much more subtle language than English or most contemporary languages. Martin Heidegger thought, German, his own native tongue, was impoverished because just the words just don't have what it takes to express what you need to say. And we could say the same thing for English, which is why I think in my own work I've pointed to a poetic metaphysics as a more accurate way of describing the world. Zoe. So in the New Testament, which was written in Greek, and in Greek there are several words for life that we interpret as life. There is Zoe, and that's the one that Jesus uses when he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Right? Zoe is the word, but that's not the only. And what does that mean, right? What do we mean by that when he says life? What's the context? Well, we can only really tell the context if we look at other Greek words for life, and one of them is bios, where we get our word biology from. And bios tells you how things live, right? So in the study of biology, you look at, say, a frog, right? You can see that frogs go through metamorphosis, that they're born from eggs, that they as tadpoles, they eat such and such plant matter, and as frogs, adult frogs, they eat insects. They don't eat plant matter anymore, right? And how they, when they mate and all that kind of stuff, that's all bios. If we apply that to human beings, it's not just the kind of biological functions that we talk about, but it would also bios. A human being would say, well, how do you make a living? Right? What do you do for a living? Right? So how do you, because what you do for a living is how you secure food, right? So that's, you can see how that goes. The other word for that's translated as life in the New Testament from Greek in general is psyche, or we would say psyche. And psyche is what imparts life to me. And another word for psyche is the soul, right? So what, and if your soul or your spirit is gone from your body, the body it's not animated, right? So we have these three words. And so, but here's the question, right? So science is really good at bios, contemporary science. They do bios very well, right? They examine, my son's a scientist, he examines heart function, he does experiments on snakes to see, because with snakes, there's a mechanism in snake biology that when they eat a big meal, like a rabbit or something, their hearts expand, and then after it's digested, heart goes back to the normal size. With human beings, if we get obese, right? We eat a big, we become obese. Our hearts also get enlarged, but they don't go back to normal, which is why he, in his work, he examines that connection, or he's seeing if he can do something by analogy to help human beings who are post obesity to fix their heart problems. So that's bios. Also, I would say that it's not, contemporary science is not as good at psyche as it is at bios, but we certainly know that, people talk about the mind-body connection and how the state of your soul can influence the way you feel, and depression can lead to illness, could lead to cancer, right? We know that, but we don't know. Well, what contemporary science never talks about is Zoe, which is, why are things alive at all? What makes things alive? And that's an important notion. And you would think that would be like the primary thing. It's like, it's the first principle, but it's ignored, entirely ignored. And this connects to the idea of the Aether, right? And that was what the ancients, or even the medievals, or the early moderns, they connected that to the life force, the anima mundi, the soul of the world. And very often their language, especially when they talk about the soul of the world, takes on feminine coloring. And, as my own work in Sophiology, right? That's basically what Sophiology is, or who Sophia is that being or principle which is the metaxu, the between the spiritual realm and the physical realm. And I would not even call that, and this is kind of a Rosicrucian idea, I would not even call spirit and matter binary opposites. I would call them opposite poles of the same principle. We can get into that some other time, I suppose. But here's the thing. So, Aether was kicked to the curb, and it was only 100 years ago or so, actually a little over 100 years ago. No, right about 100 years ago. But you would think from contemporary scientific discourse, when people mention Aether, they act like it's been gone for centuries, but it's not the truth. And in fact, here's a great example of it in this here book. This is Writings in Time of War by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest, but he was also a scientist, a paleontologist. And this was written in 1916. I'm just going to read it to you here. He talks in this section, it's in his essay, Awakening to the Cosmos. Here's the book. And here's what he says. Unity in the ether. Section 2. The first aspect of this profound oneness of all the elements of the universe is their common rooting in the mysterious and preeminently cosmic entity that we call the ether. Right? That's kind of 1916, so it's not really that long ago. And he also says that we should think of it not as having the texture of a liquid into which the countless hordes of 1,001 different particles are crowded together, but as the unimaginable state of some center that is infinitely extended in space, everywhere the same and yet everywhere different from itself. Everything in the universe, we must realize, proceeds from the ether or in the ether. Right? And I'll skip ahead, and he says, the consanguinity of the monads in the ether, which is their common stock and the sap that feeds them all, might perhaps serve to dispel, for philosophical thought, the disturbing illusion of transience. The interaction of material beings takes place by reason of and at the level of an identity. I mean, it's kind of stunning, right, from a scientist. And not surprisingly, around that same time, I think 2 years later, Teilhard wrote this kind of an amazing prose poem called The Eternal Feminine, which he takes that from Goethe, at the end of Faust, where Goethe says, the eternal feminine draws us ever onward. And so Goethe also was a scientist. I mean, he was a poetic scientist, but he was definitely a scientist. And you can see that, and if you read Teilhard de Chardin, he writes very poetically. All right, it's a really beautiful writer. And it's interesting that this metaxu, this between that he's talking about, and that he connects to the ether, which he also connects to Sophia, also participates both in a poetic intuition and scientific reasoning. So I think that's important. And so it's both art and science, which is, as Goethe said, if a man has neither art, if a man has both art and science, he has religion. And if he has neither art nor science, you better give him religion, right? So I think that's an important notion. Now, so this doesn't go away. Now, I think what's been interesting over the last, or most of my lifetime, is there are these kind of people that are characterized as quacks or crackpots, who also, I don't know if it's independently or partially independently. They discover things and they go, wait, hey, this is what they were talking about with the whole ether anima mundi thing. And one of those people in particular was Wilhelm Reich. And if you don't know about him, what a fascinating guy. Who's just amazing, intuitive thinker, but very scientific. I mean, he's not perfect. He was a psychoanalyst who trained with Freud, so his starting off point was, as Freud, right? Freud's big interest is sex, and the reason being is because he saw a lot of people got hung up about sex or about feelings of guilt and shame and connected to sex, or punishing people or shaming people because of their awakening sexual awareness as children, as teenagers. So he saw a lot of problems stemming from that. Now, whether not weighing in, whether I agree or disagree, I mean, I guess see the point, but I think it was probably overemphasized, but I think is also a reaction to kind of a Victorian mindset. But nevertheless, Reich was trained by him, and I think he was right as a scientist to not only intuit that there's something connected to life in the sexual act, right? Obviously, is it just a matter of creating a divine soup? Is it just, or is there's a spark? Is there a spark that that also is present during orgasm. I mean, a spark of the anima mundi, or the soul, or the ether, or whatever you want to call it, right? Is there something with that happens? And from that kind of starting point, Reich kind of, I don't know if I would say, well, I guess he did. He made that a principle of his worldview, and it's a start. I mean, it's an amazing, and it's an amazing starting point, and it's an amazing worldview, because he's really interested in life and what contributes to human flourishing. Now, and for him, this takes not only scientific and biological, has scientific and biological implications, but it also has social implications as well. And I'll just read a couple quotes from him. And this is the selected writings of Wilhelm Reich. He's published all kinds of books. One of the things he says here. And here's actually it's interesting. So he's saying, in short, against the natural research which created the atomic bomb stands the natural research which discovered the cosmic orgon energy, sharp, clear, and incompatible. So he's contrasting what he discovered and he called orgon energy, but as he speaks elsewhere, he's basically saying, well, it's a new word for, new term for the anima mundi, the soul of the world, or whatever you want to call it, right? The ether. And here he continues here. He said, it is a matter of deciding the question whether nature is an empty space with a few widely scattered specks, right? Or whether it is a space full of cosmic primordial energy, a continuum which functions in a lively way and obeys a generally valid natural law, right? So now think about that, the implications. We have been taught, if you're my age or younger, that most of outer space is empty. It's void. He's saying, no, that's not true. It's filled with ether. It's filled with life substance, right? The generative fertility. And this is a thing that comes up with, Teilhard's Eternal Feminine. There's so much in there about fertility and fecundity, because this is about life, right? And this is why I think it's often equated with Sophia or the divine feminine, because that's also this kind of image, this archetype of fertility and fecundity, even though it's virginal. It's a virginal fecundity, which I think is a beautiful way to think about it. And this is also an intuition that Jakob Burma came to about the eternal Sophia, right? That virginity is really a state of soul, not a state of biology, and with it is tremendous fertility, right? And if we think about the Virgin Mary and the birth of Christ, we just celebrated Christmas, right? That's talk about tremendous fertility and fecundity born of a virgin. I mean, it's really poetically beautiful. And here's another place where Reich, he says, the world soul was in everything, acting as an individual soul and at the same time as an integral part of the universal soul. It's almost exactly what Teilhard just said. These views are, in spite of astrophysical formulation, in accord with modern orgonomic functionalism. Now, one of the things Reich did, maybe you've seen the Kate Bush video or heard her song Cloud Busting, which is based on Wilhelm Reich. And his son Peter's biography is called, I don't remember what it's called. It's someplace in here. It's called A Book of Dreams. I can see it from here. Keep me from getting up. So in Book of Dreams, Peter Reich beautifully tells the story of his father's research in Ragley, Maine, I think what it's called, where he started doing research with what he called a cloudbuster. Cloudbuster is look it up. Look it up. It's a device with pipes I don't want to get into the whole explanation of what it is, but basically what a cloudbuster is, it's a kind of contraption using steel, or I use copper, but steel pipes, steel hoses, surrounded by inorganic matter like plant, wood or something, covered in something. And he claimed to be able to both make it rain and to change the weather by using this. And by working with what he called orgon energy, which in days past they would have called the ether. And so Rudolf Steiner calls it the ether. And part of what happened is he, in 1953, I think it was, 52, 53, there was a big drought in Maine, and it was about to wipe out the blueberry crops. And blueberries need water. They live in lowlands. It was about to wipe out the $1 billion, whatever, maybe millions of dollars worth of blueberries in those days. So the farmers came to Reich and said, "We heard you have this machine that can make it rain. Can you please make it rain? We'll pay you." He made it rain after he broke the drought, and so, but he claimed to be working with the ethers, and he discovered this by actually, I think, he saw a pipe pointing toward a bucket of water, and he saw the movement, or shimmering or something on the water, and he thought maybe there's something to that. And basically, it works on the principle, kind of like a reverse lightning rod, same kind of principle, but rather than it changes the energy rather than drawing and grounding it, but it does kind of ground energy at the same time. It draws from water because you have the hoses in water, and you can draw moisture from the clouds toward you, and I want to brag. A few years ago, you can also actually make it stop raining with the cloudbuster. And a few years ago here on our farm, we were getting inundated. We had, I don't know, deluge after deluge, and one of our gardens was flooded out, and a bunch of the farms around here were flooded. And out of desperation, I thought I'd make a cloudbuster, because I met a guy who had one 30 years ago, and I always stood in the back of my mind, I should try to do that one day. Well, out of desperation to make it stop raining all the time, I made a cloudbuster, and it worked. At first I don't know if I was not completely skeptical, or I wouldn't have tried, but I was like, well, let's just see if it works. And it works. And it also works with dispelling chemtrails, which that one I know works because I've done it hundreds of times. And when I first built the cloudbuster, it was before COVID, so maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. I went into town to go to the grocery store or something. I was driving home, and there were all these chemtrails, this crisscrossing the sky, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I got to get home in a hurry." And I got home, I only got about a half a mile down the road, and they all started to dissipate. And I said, "Wow, I wonder." And I thought my wife wouldn't touch the cloudbuster, and it was in the barn. And I get home, and I'll be darned if the cloudbuster was not out on the driveway and be pointed up at the sky. And I said to my wife, you didn't do that." She said, "No, I had our Daniel do it. Our youngest son, Daniel, who was probably 9 at the time, did 8 or 9. He did it. He'd seen me do it enough times." So what? Anyway, that's anecdotal evidence, but it's evidence. And not only was it anecdotal, but my neighbors. Last year we had pretty normal rainfall, so I didn't hear from anybody, but I get emails or texts from neighbors sometimes. "Hey, can you do something about this rain?" Or, one of my friends who definitely believes in this kind of radionic energy sent me this picture of all the chemtrails crisscrossing over his farm. I'm like, "Dude, I'm not home. Make your own." You're more mechanical than I am. You can do it. But to go back to our theme, right? This is the idea is that we can work with these etheric energies. And, if I can do it with $80 worth of pipe, and really, I mean, it's not like I'm devoting hours and hours of time and attention to this. But if I could do it, anybody, you imagine what DARPA can do, right? If I can do it with $80 worth of pipe, imagine what DARPA can do with billions of dollars in a black budget. And I suspect that even though for the last 100 years, officially, there, from the scientific community, there's no such thing as ether. I, I would bet money that they are absolutely working in research and probably manipulating this kinds of stuff even as we speak, and probably definitely for the last 60 or 70 years. And I think you see this most in weather modification, but even in that, the scientific community surreal. I just gotta my printer just went on. Somebody must be in another room printing something. There's no paper in it. So anyway, that was distracting. So anyway, I think what's going on with DARPA, and I think they've probably been experimenting with this, but they're more inclined toward thinking mechanical answers for everything, which is exactly what a chemtrail is. It's a mechanical answer to another kind of problem. And I think that's certainly, I think, the kind of it's kind of universal here that Reich talks about it, and he's highly critical of it, and he says, and what he says also is that having that kind of mechanical attitude that's closed to life, and you can see this, that so many of these, official, if you look at, just look at the governments and stuff, they are hostile to life, right? They don't want life. They feel it's threatening, right? Overpopulation or whatever happened, resources or whatever they're talking about. They're closed to life, and life is infinite, right? And this is what Reich concluded, and that fertility is a good thing. It's not a curse, believe it or not. Unfortunately, we're taught or conditioned that it is. But to this opening to life and to the ether, to the orgon energy, to the anima mundi, is, and what does Jesus say? I am the way, the truth, and the life. Right? That's you're tapping into that, and this is, and I won't get into the whole thing today, but this is kind of the principle of biodynamic farming. It's both sound regenerative agricultural practices, but there's also, with the biodynamic preparations, which we'll talk about someday, you're also working with the etheric forces of nature, right? You're working with nature, not against nature. If you read the scientific literature of especially the 17th and early 18th centuries, they talk about, and Bacon does this, right? They talk about nature as a woman whom they're going to torture to give up her secrets. So they use the language of rape and torture to talk about nature. And that's basically the way people have treated nature. I shouldn't say people, that governments have treated nature for the longest time. Whereas, people like biodynamic farmers, Wilhelm Reich, have tried to work with nature, or find ways to work with nature to bring healing, fecundity, and fertility back to the soil. And one thing I'll end with a little commentary, which maybe we'll talk about at another time. But so in 1925, when Rudolf Steiner had introduced Waldorf education, but more importantly, at biodynamic farming and gardening, he was asked by Aaron Fried Pfeiffer, why is it that people, given all these great spiritual teachings, but they can't take it up, they got no willpower, they can't follow things through, all they do is bicker and argue. And Steiner said, hey, it's a problem of nutrition. He said this in 1925, the foodstuffs that are available today do not have the nutritional value that they had even 50 years ago. and that was the introduction of chemical farming. And they could already see, that's why he had the conference for the biodynamic farmers, because they could already see in 1924 that things had been degenerating quickly, including the bee populations, right? Beekeeping, everything was degenerating. Fast forward to today, and look where we are, right? And so what happens when you have people in that kind of negative, what Reich would call it a deadly orgon energy. He called it DOR, deadly orgon. That it's a kind of a stagnant energy that breeds pestilence and disease and hate and fear and war. And he called that like emotional plague, right? Emotional plague, and he connected that to sexual repression and things like this. But you don't have to go there. It's a repression of the life energy, right? That it's kind of like water when it's moving is good for you. It's fertile, right? But when water is stagnant, it becomes disease ridden and corrupted. And that's the same thing with the energy. As long as it's flowing and moving, it's bringing fertility and fecundity to the world. But once it's blocked up, and that's what you can think about, he called it armoring, right? So people, in a hostile environment, they become armored, just like in deserts, the animals and plants they're in a hostile environment, so they become armored with spikes. So you can think about people or societies that are in not just hostile physical environments, but hostile psychological environments. They likewise become armored, right? So for him, for Reich, he sought ways to relieve that, to open up, to let the energy flow again and bring healing. And he said he claimed to be able to heal cancer using his research. And of course, that's why he ended up in prison, because they don't want they don't want cancer to go away. It's a moneymaker. And the same thing with Rudolf Steiner, with bringing biodynamic farming and agriculture, finding another way to increase fertility, increase fecundity, increase nutritional value in food. So there's a lot there, right? But to go back to the beginning, this all starts with, I think it really helps for us to have this more nuanced understanding of life. What we mean by life? And we can use it, and it can mean different things, right? It can mean Zoe, the life that makes life happen in the first place, or bios, how organisms operate, or suke, what makes you alive, what keeps you alive, what happens when you die. But I think it's important that we're going to have to learn a new vocabulary. I would think, that's why I think we're living in the dark ages right now. And I think looking forward, I think there's hope that, and eventually I'll be gone by the time this happens, but I would think that in the future, more attention and more will be done with working with ether rather than just the physical matter available to the senses or to microscopic intervention, right? There's something else there that can't be quantified and measured, right? But it's wild in a good way. All right. So please let me know what you think in the comments. Please subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. But I wish you all a happy new year, and I'll talk to you next time. Onward.